We're going to carry on with this still life copy in Acrylics today. So hopefully you've watched the first video. And we're going to be building on what we established in the first pass over. So we're still just using bone black and titanium white, although you could use any dark pigment with your light, with your white color, or any pigment at all really, to create a monochrome. But I've just chosen to go with a sort of black monochrome with this one. And you'll see it's quite patchy what we have from last week, but I'm going to be refining that using some slightly smaller brushes. We used quite a large brush last week, so I've got a kind of medium-sized long flat and a quite small little flat brush for details. And I'm still just using water as my medium and those open acrylics, so bone black and titanium white as my paints. So we're going to be building on what we developed underneath. And the first thing I want to do, because we're working in acrylics and it's going to dry quite quickly, is pick up my black. Oh, and the other thing you probably want is some sort of rag, which I don't actually have, to clean your brushes off. If you're just using two brushes, it's useful to be able to clean on a fairly regular basis. And we just want to go in and redefine any of those portions of the image that need to be pure black. So any of those really dark notes. So there's quite a lot underneath the bird's wing, sort of points where it gets a bit darker. I can go in and place those. And as always, you make corrections to shapes at this stage, or at any stage really. Anytime you're working, you want to correct shapes. And then we've got this really dark little sort of feathery shape, I think it is. It's got this dark shape on the other side as well. So I'm sort of gradually adjusting the shapes. But because what we have from last week is pretty accurate, it's a lot easier than it would otherwise be to do this stage. That's why it's important to get a pretty decent block in. That's most of the darkest notes in place. Maybe just a little bit more down here would be good. There's a slight texture to the darks on this. This side of the brass pot. That's a bit better. So we've got our darkest darks in, so I'm just gonna clean this smaller brush off. Actually, I'll clean the smaller brush off, but I'm gonna swap to the larger brush just to start adding the lightest points. And these are these sort of like quite fluffy, feathery shapes. So we can start to kind of thickly lay on these lightest portions. I'm going to build them up a little bit more in the later points, but we just want to start getting a sense of that, almost a sheen that comes through the feathers, which is quite nice. And being how transparent, or given how transparent acrylics tend to be, this will fade out a bit so we can kind of build on top of it again. It's a nice kind of aspect of acrylics, I find, if you work in this kind of gradual layered manner. So we can just, the lightest point, I'm just going to really load it up and see how bright it can get. And give that brush a bit of a clean as well. It's got our lightest point in now. We can go back in, and I just want to kind of smooth out some of the tones in the background. Not actually adjust the value, just smooth them out a bit, because we're just trying to, this stage, we're trying to neaten things up. So I certainly find one of the most difficult things with acrylics is, even with these sorts of open acrylics, laying in large smooth areas of tone, just because paint does dry pretty quickly. but it's a good way to kind of improve your mixing technique. You can also use, like if I'm using water, it obviously makes it go a little bit further, but you don't want to overuse the water just because that then leads to these two are going a little bit scrubby, which isn't always the nicest effect. So I want a little bit of this kind of gradient darkening down. Just the top of this, sort of like a piece of fabric that lies at the back behind. We can then work our way back over the top. We want to go back to being a little bit lighter up with these tones. And as it loops back over, it gets a bit darker again down this side. And blend that back up in. Got a little bit of a hair on my brush. Get rid of that. Yeah, so we want to drop back to this shadow, which is slightly lighter, mostly slightly lighter than that dark rim of the pot. Doesn't go quite pure black, so I'll make sure we get that in well. And then we can also reinforce the ground a little bit. So it's going to be crisp around the edge of this dark shape. But then it actually gets really dark there, doesn't it? I missed that out. So I want this kind of really dark penumbra. So it's a dark shape, but the ground underneath actually needs to be quite dark as well. So the edge is harsh, but then the tone it's not too bad for that layer below. We're not going to do too much on the bird today. We just want to try to get sort of evening out these tones. So when you're working in acrylics, as I say, it's useful just to have a few kind of separate passes over. Because things do, particularly working over the wood like this, tends to be a little bit scrubby, or if you're working over canvas you might have a similar sort of effect. So Just sort of adjusting values more than anything and adding some more complexity to the shapes as well. So that tone back there, you can see is just a little bit darker than the tone we had laid in down here. So we'll create a slight transition, creates a bit of a sense of the ground plane travelling towards us. Pushes that back as well, you can see already that's starting to push back a little bit. You can swap to the smaller brush and just try to capture some of these more specific, darker shapes. So that's something we can, I'll probably leave that section there just for today. Go into a bit more detail with that over the next pass over, but it certainly establishes a nicer kind of step back from the bird to there. And we can just put a little bit of our darker tones into the bird. Just add a little bit to it. As I say, we're not going to go kind of all in editing the bird today for this session, but we can just make a few, similar to adding the white, just a few sort of minor adjustments, starting to think about the form of the bird. In a sort of limited way. So we're starting to get some nice highlights building up on the bird. And we'll probably roughly leave it there, maybe just work a little bit around this bottom edge. Just down to here. Some of these tones down there as well. And just slightly darken this wingtip again. Got a feeling that's something we're going to have to do a little bit of working and reworking, one of those things. That's a really nice little touch. A dark wingtip. Gone slightly over. Oh, nice. Shadow underneath the bird, but that's fine. As I say, we're going to go back to this in a lot more detail probably next week. Hopefully we're aiming to probably get it done in one more week, but we'll see how much detail we want to push into it. It's nice just working sort of in a pretty simple constraints, just working with these two tones. The acrylic makes it fairly straightforward because it's not, you know, we're not battling overloading the canvas or drying times and those sorts of things. I certainly recommend these open acrylics just because it gives a little bit more time. Certainly if you prefer the feel of oil painting, it's good. So just make some really quick adjustments to the value of this wing behind as well. Needs to push a little bit darker than what we've got already. Again, that's something certainly something we'll look at in more detail. Next time we work on this. So it's not too bad for the bird. Just notice there's a few little points that are kind of a bit spotty just because of the texture, as I said earlier, of the panel. We want to just remove those, getting it feeling nice and clean for the next stage. This is mainly just a kind of neatening up stage more than anything. not too bad. So the final thing we're going to do today is just adjust the adjust the pot. So one big difference is a lot of the tones in the pot kind of to the back here, the part I guess in shadow, are quite a bit darker than what we have already. So we want to go in and start darkening those and neatening up again. Value wise here it actually goes a bit brighter than the wing, so I'm going to try to start to capture that. It's already looking a lot better than it was, that kind of transition, making the metal look a bit more beaten and giving a bit more of a sheen, which is what we want. It's looking a lot better, that pot. So the final thing left to do just for today is work our way around the inside. And just kind of smooth that out. We're going to do, as I say, more detail next week on that. Next week or two that we spend on this. It's worth just getting that little section to work. that's pretty much it for today. So everything's looking a lot smoother. Giving us a better platform to add detail. So if we tried to add detail just directly over this, or how it was when I started up this session, it would have been tricky to kind of get a nice finish, whereas now I've got this much smoother sort of platform to work from. Doing so will be a lot more manageable. Yes, that's it for today. I'll see you guys next week. As always, you can subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And if you click through to OCAD itself, you can subscribe to the studio, where you'll be able to get feedback on all the work that you make from myself and other expert tutors. But yeah, otherwise that's pretty much it, and I will see you guys soon.